Can you all hear me? How are we doing? Can you all hear me? Thumbs up? Fantastic. So welcome everyone. My name is Michelle Dibblee. I am the program director here at Washington National Cathedral, and on behalf of Dean Hollerith and the rest of the Cathedral staff, we are thrilled to welcome you to this conversation with several of our clergy about how can it be Easter when it feels like Lent. So I don't know about you all, I've been having lots of thoughts about that question. Our panelists have some as well. I'm really grateful for these three as colleagues and also for their bravery in stepping into this conversation, because none of us have lived through a pandemic and done Holy Week. So we are figuring it out together. So our Canon Provost, Jan Pope, our Canon Vicar, Dana Corsello, and our Canon Missioner, Leonard Hamlin, are here to approach this conversation and share some of their thoughts with us. And we also, as Margaret said earlier, will be taking some questions from you all. So at any time, feel free to drop those in the chat box. So the way this will work today, I'm going to throw a question to the three of them to get us started. We'll have some conversation. At some point, we'll switch over, probably in about 20-25 minutes, to the questions that you have. And then we'll wrap up in about 45 minutes to an hour, kind of depending on how things are going. So before we get started in earnest, I have asked our Canon Provost to say a prayer to get us started. So, Dan?
This is a prayer that we've been using during this time at the Cathedral. It's a prayer for people facing great uncertainty, which certainly seems to be our time, and it's adapted from a prayer in the New Zealand prayer book. Let us pray. God of the present moment, God who in Jesus stills the storm and soothes the frantic heart, bring hope and courage to all who wait or work in uncertainty. Bring hope that you will make them the equal of whatever lies ahead. Bring them courage to endure what cannot be avoided. For your will is health and wholeness. You are God, and we need you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So here's the first question, and as you each answer the question, I would love for you to say just a sentence or two about what your role is from the Cathedral. I know that some of the folks joining us today are congregation members and others who have been around the Cathedral for a long time, but we also have some new folks, so let's introduce ourselves. So the first opening question, if you will, is I'm really curious about how you personally are approaching either the challenge or the inspiration of practicing Holy Week during this time. So what are you finding particularly challenging or particularly inspiring as you look ahead to the coming days? And Jan, if you would jump in and start, that would be great. And then just for the sake of ease, Dana, and then Leonard, if we can just go in that order. We'll get started.
Michelle, thank you. So as the provost of the Cathedral, I work with the dean and the senior leadership on the longer term strategic ministry and mission of the Cathedral. I'm a sacramental priest at the Cathedral, and so I join with my colleagues in preaching and celebrating the Eucharist and weddings and funerals and baptisms and all those things that we associate with a community of faith. In addition, our development department reports to me, and part of my mission is also to represent the Cathedral outside of Washington, and so I do a fair amount of guest preaching and speaking around the country as we seek to live in to being a spiritual home for the nation. Now, specifically, Michelle, to your question, of course, the challenge for me is not being with the people that I know and love. That's a challenge for all of us. We are relational people, and our community is no different than any other across the country. And so that is the challenge for me. But what inspires me is the ways that so many people within the Cathedral community and certainly across our country and across the globe are living into the reality that we're a global community. We're inextricably interconnected as a people. And I think that part of our journey in this Holy Week is to live that spiritually as we live it in a very practical way. And so I'm inspired by acts great and small that I see within our community, I see around our country, and I see really around the world.
Thank you. Dana?
Hello, everyone. As the vicar of the cathedral, I am the pastor or the rector, so to speak, of the congregation. There's a vibrant community of over 1,000 people who are the heartbeat of the cathedral and consider the cathedral their spiritual home. So like Jan and Leonard, I'm a sacramental priest, and I do weddings and funerals and baptisms and all of it. So that's my primary role. To answer your question, Michelle, you know, frankly, I'm still living into it. I see this as, what we're living through is truly historic. It's unprecedented, and how we respond will be remembered and can very well define us. So, like Jan, and I think a lot of people, we cannot be church right now. And to be church means being together and to being in community with one another, to be able to touch and laugh and hug each other, pray with each other in person, like live the incarnational way that we exist as Christians. So that's certainly really difficult for me. I mean, pastorally, we certainly are busy. I mean, we're calling everyone, we're trying to stay in touch with everyone, but we can't really truly reach out and touch people. So I'm struggling with that. But I'm also preaching on Good Friday, and frankly, I don't know how to handle it because I don't want it to be COVID-19. And it's already 24/7 COVID-19. But also, this is a really dark time, like a pall has descended upon our nation. And I also think we need to rest and be still within that and live what Good Friday is. Because I think for many people, they're actually getting a taste of the true meaning of darkness. And so I'm just struggling putting all of this together without being too morose, but also preaching the truth about how people are feeling and what's going on. And I don't have it figured out. I'll end there.
Well, certainly as Canon Missioner, I'm grateful to be with my colleagues today, and my responsibility really at the cathedral is to help lead the cathedral in its community engagement, our connection with the city and the region and those around, to help make certain that we are actively, as we say, on mission and at work, carrying out the work that Christ has given us, as well as it's often termed as the hands and feet that are needed, especially at times like this, as well as being involved in our social justice and racial justice work, helping to lead us in those areas. I have to immediately join with my colleagues right away to say that we're all sharing the same struggle. And that struggle is that you miss the community. You miss the face-to-face, the touching and agreeing that is often termed within our communities. I use so much to that, I think we do as clergy, but you look forward to that as just a person of faith, that what makes it live is being together with someone else, to be part of the community. And so that's where my struggle is. Where I am inspired, however, is that we are in a time right now where we all have to rethink what we're doing. I'm grateful to be able to share with my colleagues. Many know that as I come out of through my Baptist tradition. And so I've had to look at everything differently and to walk into that and to question new space. I feel like I've got plenty of company right now of questioning of how we do things in a way that would be pleasing and serving at a time like this.
Mhm.
Thank you all. I want to stay for a minute because I think we're all feeling the strain of being away from those people that we love, right? And also of being away from those communities who hold all kinds of people, some of whom we're closer to than others, but there are families, right? There are church families and our congregation families. So what is it that is sustaining any of you in these moments where we can't be in those spaces, right? Are there practices or conversations or other things that are helping you to cross that bridge, right? Are there, Jan, I see you nodding. So would you say, you all are gonna learn, right? If you make eye contact or nod when I'm asking you a question, it might be your question. But Jan, do you have thoughts? And then either Leonard or Dana, can you share as well?
So one of the things that this time has provided an opportunity to do is spend more time on the phone as opposed to emailing someone or just having real conversations and long conversations. And so that has helped me with the connection. What sustains me are, the practices that I do every day. I think that particularly when schedules are so disrupted, finding a new rhythm and a new discipline to the moment is really important. It helps us with our grounding. So I still get up ridiculously early in the morning. I still do my morning prayers, but I do my morning walk. And that's a meditative walk. And because I live so near the cathedral, I often will see members of our community who are also crazy and out walking early in the morning. And we wave from, 10 feet away. But that's something that helps to ground me and sustain me for whatever the day may hold.
Mhm. I would say it's the same for me. One of my Lenten disciplines has always been, especially this week before Easter, to connect with those folks that I've lost touch with. I've been a really bad friend, and to friends from way back, it's just not having the emotional energy to connect because you're always on to the very next thing. And so today I made a list of everyone I need to send Easter cards to, and everyone I need to actually, to Jan's point, have a real phone call with or FaceTime with. Sending a text, I don't think is going to do it. So for me, before Easter, I'm going to do that, and that will connect me, and I think just make me feel more whole. And I hope for the friends and those I've abandoned will certainly feel that way too. And I've just tried to keep a routine. We work, we're all working. I mean, it's not that we've stopped working, we're just working in a different way, which I find even more exhausting, which I don't quite know why. But a good afternoon walk is something that I process my prayer when I walk or exercise. So that's been keeping me grounded.
Joy, it really has been an opportunity for me to, I guess, deepen some of the practices that I am regularly engaging within. Very simply, I always walk the dog in the morning, and like many others who have pets, but I am trying to be very intentional about listening. I have probably heard the birds in the morning like I've never heard them before. In my reading, certain words that I could have read the passage, as we know, in my lifetime thousands of times now, but to be focused in and to hear something that perhaps I have not heard before. But to me, it's been the opportunity, or what has sustained me, is being very intentional about that, because we're all dealing with change. And I think what we forget about change in many moments is that change requires something from us versus just getting something from it. And so if we really are going to change, and what I've been questioning is, to put it probably in biblical terms, like we all say, what does the Lord require of me in this moment? That we would be able to, and I would be able to primarily hear something different and be sustained in the moment by his presence.
Thank you. I also just want to note that one of our guests has suggested that it's also sustaining to remember why we're apart from each other, that we're saving lives and protecting those we love in our communities. So I want to just appreciate that comment and offer that to the conversation as well. So thank you, Richard. And how does, I'm thinking now about the Last Supper, right? Maundy Thursday. And I was thinking about this conversation and recognizing that I actually have to go back almost a month to the Last Supper that I shared with people in person that aren't the people that I live with. And it made me wonder, I think this question about adaptation, the question about being separate from one another, what translates about a Maundy Thursday service to this way of being with one another, right? I mean, that's to think about having a meal together and to think about the practice that feels sacred or sacramental to many people of Jesus washing the disciples' feet and us reenacting that practice or appreciating it as a service or an act of love that we do for one another during that service. So I'm wondering if there's anything that comes to mind for any of you as we translate the experience of those sacraments, a meal together, a foot washing, to how we might practice those things for Maundy Thursday, or what might we take from this particular experience of Maundy Thursday.
I'm happy to start.
Thank you.
Particularly since I'm preaching on Maundy Thursday, so I'm going to listen carefully to what Dana and Leonard say so they can help me with my sermon. Part of what I'm struck with is it is really a farewell meal that Jesus has with his disciples. He knows what's ahead of him, and he's trying to impart in that meal and in what they call in John's gospel, the farewell discourse, the things he wants people to remember when he's no longer physically in their presence. And I think particularly in this time we're in, it's really important not to wait and hold, a particular time to tell the people you love them, and why they're important to you. And to have those sorts of conversations that sometimes it seems we don't get around to. And I know you were a little more focused on, being together in a meal, but part of what is resonating with me in this time is this is a perfect time to be having those conversations, much like Dana was saying about reaching out to friends of long standing in her life and her need and desire and longing to reconnect. And so I think part of what I'm, the lessons that I'm taking from this time that we're in is, don't wait. It's important to say the things that are the things of our hearts.
I don't know if this directly answers that question, Michelle. I've been thinking about what all of us will be doing on Easter Sunday or not doing. And it's taken me back to a look in history and the primal narrative of Christianity, when in that first century, Christians, it was illegal to be Christian. I mean, they were persecuted, they were martyred, they were burned at the stake by Nero, and many others. And so for a good 100 years or longer, they were underground and they worshiped in house churches. And so that's what we're going to be doing. All across this land and across the world, we'll be worshiping at our own house churches. And so rather than a farewell meal, to Jan's point, because the Maundy Thursday, the foot wash, it's the most intimate thing that Jesus ever, it was just the most beautiful intimacy. I hope that come Easter, we can all break bread together as a family and have that intimacy, even if it's a family of 2 or 4 or whatever your unit is at home. And if you're alone, perhaps you can have a Zoom, Easter meal together. But this isn't the first time that Easter has been celebrated like this in our history as Christians. It's very new for us, but I hope we can live that intimacy. We can still have the celebration as the early Christians did, but just within our own home. So I don't feel that things are lost at all. I think it's just different and a new way of creating exactly what you're talking about.
I want to add, Dana, to what you're saying. One of our guests emailed us a comment about how grandparents and parents lived Holy Week surrounded by war, surrounded by chaos, surrounded by, so not just the early church, but are in generations prior to our own. And perhaps for people who are in our lives now, right, have lived Easter in times of darkness in their own personal lives or their family lives. And so,
without a doubt, yes.
Yeah, so that there's a dissonance for many of us between how we have been at Easter and the experience that we're having this year, and that's not true for everyone. Leonard, I wanted to actually sort of shift that conversation to you. I know in your outreach work, one of the things that you're thinking about are the communities that we're connected to. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to something that Dana also mentioned earlier, which is the darkness that we're in, and how we either might respond, how the church might respond, or how to support those who are in moments of darkness that may be dissimilar to this one, or layered onto this one that some of us have.
No, I appreciate the question, and even being able to focus in that way, that while many are describing the moment or perhaps noticing just how heavy and dark the moment may feel to them, and in reality, in some aspects, it can be described that way. When I coming out of and standing within my tradition, as well as my cultural tradition, it's always been part of the tradition to look for the hope. Coming, personal experience, and all throughout my life, there have been moments where just getting up in the morning, making it through the day, has been part of conversations that I'm routinely and have been routinely involved in. So I've had some friends say, it's not new, it's just different. That's the way they've described it. To say that while it may be new to some, for many who live on the margins, those who we seek to do ministry with and for, they are living on the margins constantly. And so it's not seeing this as something brand new. It's just seeing this as something else that has to be engaged in the moment. And that's why, out of my tradition as well, most of our services end in a celebratory moment, because you are, no matter, I have always said, those that know me, it's a quote that I would always use where I was serving in the congregation, that no matter how dark it appears, there's always a bright side somewhere, which is lifted from an old hymn. And that hymn would go on to say, don't you rest until you find it. There's a bright side somewhere. And so we're not to rest, as we say, in that kind of understanding where we give up or give in or sit down. But now's the time to pick up and to dig deeper and to look further. I do want to add very quickly, as my colleagues were referencing, this is an opportunity as well to think about presence in a different way. Because even as we look at that Maundy Thursday around the table, he was taking advantage of the moment he had with them in presence. But they were being called to understand presence in a new way. And in that new way of understanding what presence and in the fullness of it, they would be able to do more than they ever thought they would be able to do.
Mhm.
Thank you, Leonard. There's two other things I want to put on the table, and folks who are writing in the Q&A box or on the chat in Facebook, thank you. It's really helpful to have your thoughts coming in to help shape the conversation. And there's two ideas that I've been thinking about relative to this. And one of them, Leonard, you just touched on, which is about how do we seek celebration and resurrection when typically our Holy Week experience is bracketed by a schedule that we've lived, right? We have Good Friday and then we have Holy Saturday, and we can pretend that Easter's not coming, but really we kind of know that it's around the corner. And so in this moment, what does it mean to look towards a horizon that we don't know where the horizon actually is? And so how do we look for resurrection or celebration today, knowing that we don't have like that end point that we're going to cross? We don't know where that threshold is.
Michelle, can I start with that? Because this is what I've been dwelling on and literally thinking about this for years, because not all resurrections happen in 3 days. That's just the bottom line. Families suffer with depression, mental illness, drug addiction, alcohol. I mean, all humans are fragile, and life happens and life interferes and makes it so difficult for so many. I mean, I know so many families whose children are just in a black hole and the parents are barely making it. So not all resurrections happen in 3 days. But as Leonard said, God is the hope. There is nothing outside of God's power to redeem. And so that's what we have to hold on to. And especially this year, we don't know when the coronavirus will, it'll be dissipated enough that we can sort of resume to a normal life. We have no idea. So we have to, I think we just are going to have to dwell in this the best that we can, knowing that there's nothing out of God's power. God is with us. We abide in God's trust. Like you said, those after Jesus's crucifixion, I mean, they were bereft. They were terrified. They deserted him, the disciples. It was such a horrible, awful time. And from our privilege, our purchase of privilege, we don't ever have to really live that. We don't, unless you've experienced some death or something like that, something that's happening with people all over the world right now. And so I think we are going to have to get, I hate to use the word comfortable, and I don't even know if I'm making sense, but we are going to have to get comfortable with the fact that resurrections don't all happen in 3 days and live in that space.
I'd like to piggyback on that, Dana. I think part of what gives me hope and helps to ground me is if we look at the biblical narrative, there's always an arc. God's promises don't happen necessarily tomorrow, but God is faithful. And as I was even thinking about this conversation, I went to one of my go-to theologians, who's Walter Brueggemann, and he picks up, Dana, exactly on what you said. And then in speaking about God, he says, "You're a God who makes promises with no evidence at hand or in sight.
Mm,
You're a God powerful in purpose, hidden in performance, faithful over time."
yeah.
And, I think if we look at the arc of our own lives,
Mhm.
there are ups and downs for everyone, but God is faithful. And we hold on to the hope, not just that we see in the biblical narrative, but in our own.
I want to thank both Jan and Dana and Michelle for raising this again. I get excited to be able to join in with conversations like this, because one of my favorite hymns is "Great is Thy Faithfulness." It has always been because of knowing that God is faithful. I think at our best as followers of Christ, witnesses and disciples, the work that we do is to be scatterers of good seed.
Mhm.
That's about the best that we can do, to have faith of scattering good seeds, because we are planting seeds, or called to plant seeds, so that there would be trees whose fruit we would never eat.
Mhm.
And so, I listened to those who were before me when we talk about grandparents and those who affected our lives. They worked in such a way that many of us are living in what we might call the overflow of their prayers.
Mm,
We're really the recipients of the work and the effort and their faith. We're called to live in such a way in this moment that if we are the recipients of grace such as this, there's a portion of it that we may be able to experience, but our children and our children's children's children, as is often referred to, will be, and hopefully will be, the recipients of the faith work we do right now. That we have to be so committed to, as Jan said, to know that God is faithful. And that is something, as I said, that in growing up, that I heard from the very beginning of hearing, as we said, the voices of those around me, and the experience of living and walking through, that we know that God will show up. And he may not come when you want him, as we say in our tradition, but he's always on time.
Nice. I want to shift a little bit more explicitly to some of the questions that are coming in here. And a couple of them are really practical. And so I want to ask these questions of our panelists. And I also want to invite people who are in Zoom to put some thoughts into the chat. And if you're listening on Facebook, do the same, because I know that there is a lot of wisdom out there about the many topics, but this particularly. So here's the question. What practical suggestions might there be out there for practicing Holy Week services within our homes, right? How might we have Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Easter celebration? And a couple of things have come up. I think there's probably more if we mine a little bit. And then there's a couple people have said, how do we do this when we're alone, right? It's one thing to imagine having a family around an Easter dinner table. Alone, what suggestions or advice might we have for practicing or experiencing these next few days?
Well, I'll jump in to start on this go round. One of the things that happened just this past Sunday, which I was grateful for, is we had a very large family Zoom gathering. I'm learning how to use, of course, technology in a way that I've never had to use it before. And it was wonderful to share with the entire family. We had at least, well, not the entire family, but we had about 30 spread out in different places, all meeting in Zoom just around worship time. And so that we could share. I do think we have to develop, as Dana was referring to, what are the traditions that we really have in our home? Because many of our practices we have reserved for outside of the home. but we have no practices at home, and that's where we're struggling. And that many might find it strange to light a candle in their house or to share meal in such a way where they're setting up. Again, I come from family that had, the altar in your house. And so how did you practice was always a question. And I'm grateful now that some are really struggling with this, and they have to make a decision of what works best in their home, those small gatherings. Because what feels strange is that I've never done it in this place, when Jesus always told us, carry the message home first.
And I would suggest, there's so many churches around the world, and the Cathedral certainly, we all have our online we're live streaming our services, and you can certainly join those and pray along. You can find the Book of Common Prayer online and call that up in advance and just follow along and say the prayers out loud. And I don't know if that's not really the most incarnational substitute, but like Leonard's suggestion, gather your neighbors, even if you have to be 6 feet apart, in the hallway. I don't know where you all live, but try to have some sort of call and response, maybe with the prayers or breaking bread together. I think this is a time when we just have to use our imaginations. You really do. Jesus, no one's going to judge you for what you do or do not do. Use your imaginations and reach out to your family and friends, especially those of you who are single, and see how you can connect.
I would also just remind people that our leaflets for our services go up before the services, and you can use those as a resource for prayers, for hymns, because we're limiting the number, keeping our numbers to 10 at any time for a service at the Cathedral. Dana, Leonard, and Michelle and I all have a lot of experience now worshiping at home, just like you. And my husband, John, and I sit next to one another on a sofa, and we're worshiping along. He says he won't sing the hymns. I do. I'm kidding. But I think that there are a lot of different ways that you can adapt resources that are online for your own use.
Well, and Margaret, who's helping with this webinar, said people can bake bread, put candles in your windows. I would think candles in the windows, especially on Maundy Thursday and Good Friday. And then, the one thing I'm going to miss so much here, the vigil, our Easter vigil, there comes a point in the service when Jesus is actually resurrected, and we shake these bells. I have bells somewhere in my office. Hold on. Where are my bells? Oh, I'm not seeing them. But you could shake the bells on Easter. Just like people in New York and big cities around the world, at 7 p.m. they open their doors and they bang on pots and pans to salute those on the front lines. You can be creative, things like that.
Fantastic. So here's a question about resurrection, to go back to this idea, and I'm going to add to it. So the question itself is, where do you all anticipate finding resurrection? And resurrection is not something easily anticipated, and sometimes it happens when we're not trying to anticipate, right? So there's a lot wrapped into that question. But to the extent that you might be able to anticipate resurrection, where do you think it might show up for you all over the next several days? And the alternative, or perhaps the addition, is, do you have a story of resurrection that you hold in your heart when you need to remember that resurrection is possible, right? Is there a story that you go back to that's yours or someone you love to help lift you into those moments when you need it?
I think in jumping in for that first, when persons describe or use the term as resurrection moment, it might mean something different or be interpreted different ways. So I will answer that knowing that for those who are listening and perhaps wrestling with the question, you might be coming at this from your particular understanding of what a resurrection moment might mean in your life. I've always looked for what I would say resurrection moments as those moments of the miraculous that take place within our lives on daily basis. Really, if it's not daily, we can all point to episodes where we can see God at work in such a manner that what we thought would never be, all of a sudden becomes possible. Again, I'm probably approaching this out of, I've been so influenced through the civil rights era and parents and all of the tradition that many of the things that some said were impossible because of faith, I've seen God work and turn nothing into something. And I'm grateful for that. Whether that be seeing it in other person's lives or seeing it within my life, I look for those moments, but I also expect those moments because, as my colleagues and particularly Jan said, I know God is faithful. And I just know that somewhere around the bend of the road that I can't see around, he's already operating. And as you put it, Michelle, to say the horizon, just over the horizon, I know he's waiting to lift the sun. It may take a long time for, in my estimation, for it to come up, but I just have faith in knowing that it will. And so I'm looking very intently, trying to make my way closer to it, either to wait on it, to anticipate it, but more than anything else, to be prepared for that moment when it does appear.
Well, can I just say I had one of those little moments today. I was in my kitchen drinking my coffee. It's usually when they come to me, sometimes it's just listening to NPR, but today I was watching CBS, the morning show, and they did a little segment on a nurse in Detroit. And it was at a hospital. It was in between shifts. And this nurse, to keep the morale going, sang Amazing Grace to this entire floor of doctors, caregivers, nurses, everyone. I'm standing there with my coffee cup, just tears are streaming down my face. It was so beautiful. I mean, it was just truly a moment. It was a breakthrough moment. That's what a resurrection is. It's just some sort of breakthrough moment. And, you know, before all of this happened, all of those people in that hospital, and I'm sure they represented all faiths. It doesn't matter. In that moment, they came together because they are God's creatures. Their images, it was truly an image of the kingdom of God. I'm telling, it was just glorious. I'll never forget it.
And to that point about resurrection, both Dana and I saw that and I wept as well. It's really beautiful. You and I are pathetic. At any rate, I'm reminded, you know, resurrection happens every day. And somebody on chat's going to correct me on this, but I think it was Henry Nouwen who said something to the effect that the miracle isn't just that Jesus came and lived among us and died and was resurrected, but that Jesus continues to come and live and die and be raised again and again and again. And so I think if we just pay attention, we see those resurrection moments each and every day.
Thank you all for all of those thoughts. I just want to share a comment that has just come in from one of our guests. And This is from Betty. Scripture says I have been crucified with Christ and share in his resurrection. So I am, in a sense, living a resurrected life now, living in eternity. As a widow living alone without a Christian family, I take great solace and joy in being invited to move through Good Friday into Easter with Jesus. And I know that there are millions of widows like me throughout the world. The aloneness of this Easter joins me with them. It has also made me more aware of how abandoned Jesus felt on the cross, but how all the more glorious his resurrection that I am part of. Praise be to God. I wanted to share that because I think it speaks to a grace that God sometimes offers us to feel connected despite all of the things that get in the way of that connection and of Jesus's presence with us. So I want to ask you all a final question, barring any additional questions that come in. It seems like they've slowed down, and that is, how are you going to celebrate Easter? What do you anticipate? What do you see yourself doing? And what do you anticipate will be? I'm just going to leave it there. I can stop. How are you celebrating Easter?
Don't all speak at once.
All right, so I will get up at a ridiculously early hour like I do every day. I'll say my prayers, I'll go for a walk, and Leonard and Dana and I and Michelle will all be tuning in to watch the cathedral's service. And then, spending time with my husband and calling loved ones.
Yeah. I probably exactly the same. We'll make a big dinner, hopefully that afternoon. And if I can convince our next door neighbor, who was Mike McCarthy, our Canon for music, who's ignoring me lately, if he, maybe we can all at least have a glass of champagne or something together here on the cathedral grounds, since I live here. Maybe an Easter egg hunt with his children. We do that every year.
I will say that my colleagues have helped me as well, even in the moment. I cannot remember the last time I was not up at sunrise on Easter. And so it becomes this year, I have to be very intentional, again, to just seeing the sunrise on Easter. We've already put out the call for the family to get that group together again. And so as we'll have an opportunity individually, perhaps as Jen was saying, to watch service, we're looking forward to that Zoom call. And I think that there's going to be quite a few more who will be involved just to connect and talk with each other. And perhaps someone was talking about even maybe having a brunch, where everybody's having brunch and just leaves it open for conversations to take place. So we're seeking to be, as you said, Dana, creative. And I hope everyone else will be too.
Well, thank you all so much. There's so much wisdom available to us when we ask and when we listen. And so I have learned and listened, and I hope that this, for those of you who are preaching, hopefully there has been wisdom here to help support you in that journey over the next few days. And I would love to ask us to close with a prayer. And Dana and Leonard are both such good prayers, I can't pick one of them. And so Leonard, would you start the prayer and then hand it over to Dana to close us out? And we'll say, just quickly before we do that, I want to thank Margaret Rawls for all of the tech support that she's been providing, not just for this event, but she practically, not exactly single-handedly, but she and a few other folks have worked really hard to get up to speed to be able to, so that we can host something like this. And the communications team has been supportive. I know Hannah has been hanging out on Facebook, making sure we have a presence there. So Hannah, thank you. And we are going to close out with a prayer from Leonard, a handoff to Dana, and a big old amen. Leonard, over to you.
Certainly. Well, I'm going to share a prayer, one of my favorite prayers from Mary McLeod Bethune. And so why don't you join me in this word of prayer. Father, we call thee, Father, because we love thee. We are glad to be called thy children. and to dedicate our lives to the service that extends through willing hearts and hands to the betterment of all mankind. We send a cry of thanksgiving for people of all races, creeds, classes, and colors, and the world over, and pray that through the instrumentality of our lives, the spirit of peace, joy, and fellowship shall circle the world. We know that the world is filled with discordant notes, but help us to so unite our efforts that we may all join in one harmonious symphony for peace and fellowship and justice and equality of opportunity for all. The task that we perform this day and in the days to come might be performed with forgiveness for all of our errors. So we dedicate all of this, Lord, to you, and grant us strength and courage, faith and humility, sufficient for the task assigned to us. Amen.
And I will end with my favorite theologian, Julian of Norwich. This is from her Revelations of Divine Love, and I think you all know it. My mother used to say this to me when she would hang up before every phone call. But all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Amen.
Amen. And all God's people said,
Amen.
God
Thank you,
bless everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for everyone for joining us.
Have a blessed Holy Week
Blessed Easter.
and Easter.
Yeah. See you all online. This will be posted on YouTube. So if you want to share it afterwards, feel free to track down that link, and or it will remain on our Facebook page as a Facebook event as well. So thank you all. Have a blessed Holy Week. Goodbye.